At 52, I opened my pantry one evening and had one of those ridiculous moments that makes you question how you have been running your household for so many years. The shelves were full, the refrigerator was crowded, the freezer had bags stacked on top of bags, and yet I stood there thinking, I have nothing to make for dinner. I had pasta but no ground meat, cereal but almost no milk, sandwich bread but nothing I actually wanted to put between two slices. I had 3 bottles of barbecue sauce, 4 cans of beans, 2 unopened jars of pickles, enough crackers to feed a small neighborhood, and somehow I had run out of eggs again. That was the moment I realized my grocery problem was not simply that food had become more expensive, although it certainly had, and it was not that I needed to become better at finding coupons, shopping sales, or driving across town to save 20 cents on a can of tomatoes. My real problem was much more basic. I had no system telling me when something actually needed to be replaced. I was shopping by memory, by emotion, and sometimes by fear. If I opened the refrigerator and saw half a carton of milk, I would think, I should probably get milk. If I walked past peanut butter at the store and could not remember whether there was another jar at home, I would throw one in the cart just in case. Then I would get home and discover 2 unopened jars already sitting behind the oatmeal. But the opposite happened just as often. I would assume we had coffee, because I remembered seeing the container a few days earlier, then wake up Sunday morning and discover barely enough grounds for 1 pot. Suddenly, I was making an unplanned trip to the grocery store for coffee, and of course nobody goes into an American supermarket for one thing and remains completely immune to everything else. I would grab coffee, notice eggs were low, remember we might need bananas, see chicken on sale, walk past a display of chips, pick up dish soap because I was not sure how much was left, and somehow a $10 emergency became a $40 or $50 trip. I used to blame myself for having poor discipline, but eventually I saw the pattern. Every extra trip began with uncertainty. I simply did not know what we had, how fast we used it, or exactly when I should replace it, and uncertainty is expensive, especially when grocery prices, gasoline, utilities, insurance, and almost every other household expense are competing for the same paycheck. The strange thing was that I had always believed a full pantry meant I was prepared. I grew up with the idea that having extras was responsible, and there is nothing wrong with keeping a reasonable reserve, but somewhere along the way, I had confused being prepared with buying things whenever they crossed my mind. My shelves were full, but they were not organized around the way I actually lived. I had too much of slow-moving items and too little of the things we used every week, and that is when I borrowed an idea that businesses have used for years, something called a reorder point. I did not need spreadsheets, software, barcodes, or a warehouse manager. I just needed to decide, for every grocery we bought regularly, exactly how low I was willing to let the supply get before it went back on the shopping list. Instead of asking, are we getting low on coffee? I wanted a specific answer. Instead of wondering, should I buy another jar of peanut butter? I wanted a rule. Instead of buying canned tomatoes because they were on sale, I wanted to know whether I actually needed them. The idea was almost embarrassingly simple. Every important grocery would have a line. Once the quantity dropped below that line, I would reorder it. If it had not reached the line, I would leave it alone. No guessing, no panic, no buying another one, because I happened to see a bright sale sign. And that evening, standing in front of an overstuffed pantry, while still missing ingredients for dinner, I decided I was finished shopping from memory, from fear, and from that vague feeling that maybe we were running low. I was going to give every regular grocery in my house a clear signal that said, now it is time to buy. And I had no idea yet how much that one small change was going to affect not only my grocery bill, but the way my entire kitchen felt. The next morning, I took a notebook into the kitchen and started with the groceries we used most often. Not everything in the house, just the things that caused the most trouble when they disappeared unexpectedly. Milk, eggs, coffee, bread, oatmeal, peanut butter, rice, canned tomatoes, frozen vegetables, chicken, toilet paper, paper towels, dish soap, and laundry detergent, and I quickly realized that setting a reorder point was not the same as deciding how much I wanted to keep in the house. The question was much simpler. How much of this item can I have left before I need to put it on the next grocery list? For milk, I decided that once we opened the last container, milk automatically went on the list. I did not wait until the carton was empty, because running out of milk meant either changing breakfast plans or making an extra trip. For eggs, my line became about 6 eggs. When I saw half a dozen left, I knew we had enough for a few breakfasts, but not enough to forget about them. For another week, coffee needed a bigger cushion because in my house, running out of coffee felt like a genuine household emergency. So I started putting it on the list when I estimated about 1 week of coffee remained. Not when the container was empty. Oatmeal was different. I kept one unopened container as the backup. Once I opened that backup, oatmeal went onto the list. Peanut butter worked the same way. One open jar, one backup jar. When the backup became the open jar, I bought another one. Suddenly, there was no reason to stand in the grocery aisle, wondering whether I had peanut butter at home. The rule had already made the decision for me. Canned foods required a little more thought because they last longer and are easy to overbuy. I looked at how often I actually used canned tomatoes and realized that 2 cans were enough to carry me until another shopping trip. So 2 became my reorder point. If I had 4 or 5 cans, I did not buy them. Even if there was a sale, rice was similar. I did not need 3 giant bags sitting in the pantry just because rice was inexpensive. I needed enough to cover the meals we regularly cooked, plus a reasonable cushion. Frozen chicken was different again. Because freezer space itself has value, I decided that when I had enough chicken left for only 2 planned dinners, it was time to add chicken to the list. That gave me time to replace it without turning my freezer into a storage locker. Fresh produce taught me another lesson. Some things should have almost no backup at all. Buying extra lettuce, berries, spinach, or avocados did not make me more prepared if half of them ended up wilted or forgotten. With fresh food, spoilage was often a bigger risk than running out. So my reorder point was usually connected to the next few meals, not to keeping extras. Household supplies were the opposite. I wanted a little more breathing room, with toilet paper, detergent, and dish soap, because they did not spoil, and because running out of them was annoying enough to trigger an unnecessary store trip. As I worked through the kitchen, I began using 3 questions for every item. How fast do we use this? How often do I shop? And how inconvenient would it be if we ran out? Those 3 questions were enough to create a practical reorder point without making the system complicated. And then I discovered something that made the whole method even more useful. I needed a second number too, a stock-up limit. The reorder point told me when to buy, but the stock-up limit told me when to stop. If peanut butter went on the list when I opened the backup jar, that did not mean a 2-for-1 promotion gave me permission to bring home 6 more jars. If canned tomatoes hit their reorder point, I might buy 2 or 3 cans, depending on the price and our meal plan. But I still had a maximum amount I was willing to store. This became important because grocery stores are very good at making abundance feel like savings, bigger packages, warehouse sizes, multiple item discounts, digital coupons, and bright signs can make buying more feel responsible. But if I already have more than I can use comfortably, a lower price does not automatically make it a better purchase. By the end of that morning, my kitchen looked exactly the same. I had not reorganized every shelf, bought new containers, or created some picture-perfect pantry. But mentally it felt completely different, because for the first time, nearly every important item had a rule. I did not have to remember everything anymore. I just had to notice when something crossed its line, and once that happened, grocery shopping started feeling less like a guessing game and more like a simple system I could actually trust. Once I had reorder points written down, I noticed something almost immediately. Sales had been making far more decisions for me than I realized. I used to walk into a grocery store with a reasonable list and then let the store rewrite it for me. Cereal was 2 boxes for $6, so I bought two even though we still had cereal at home. Pasta sauce was buy one get one free. So suddenly 4 jars seemed like a smart idea. Coffee had a digital coupon. Frozen vegetables were marked down. Chicken thighs had a bright yellow sales sticker. And by the time I reached the checkout, half the things in my cart were not there because I needed them. They were there because the price made me afraid I would regret leaving them behind. I had been treating every sale like a deadline, buy it now or lose the opportunity. But my reorder system forced me to ask a different question. Have I actually reached the point where this item needs to be replaced? If the answer was no, I kept walking. And that one question changed grocery shopping more than I expected. One week, my store had peanut butter at a price I would normally have considered excellent. The old version of me would have picked up 2 jars automatically, maybe 3, because peanut butter lasts a long time and we always use it eventually. But I checked my pantry before leaving home and knew we had an open jar plus a full backup. That meant peanut butter had not reached its reorder point, so I passed the display without putting anything in the cart. It felt strange at first, almost like I was wasting money by refusing a bargain. Then I realized I had spent $0, which was still cheaper than buying something. Simply because it was discounted, coffee became a more difficult test, because coffee prices can move enough that a good sale feels worth grabbing. And coffee is something we genuinely use every day. But even there, I created a boundary. If coffee had reached its reorder point and the price was good, I could buy enough to bring the pantry back to my normal stock level. If I already had plenty, the sale was not for me. The same rule worked with canned soup, pasta, oatmeal, rice, frozen vegetables, laundry detergent, paper towels, and almost every other item stores love to promote in multiples. I began noticing the language on signs too. Buy 3 and save, stock up now, family size, value pack, limited time deal. Those words are not necessarily dishonest. Sometimes the larger package really does have a better unit price. Sometimes a promotion really is a strong deal. But none of those signs know how much food is already sitting in my house. The supermarket knows the price. I know my inventory. And I finally understood that I needed both pieces of information before something became a bargain. This mattered even more when prices were unpredictable, because when people hear that beef is expensive, coffee is rising, or certain vegetables have become more costly, it is natural to want to protect ourselves by buying extra whenever we see a lower price. I felt that instinct too, especially at 52. Because I was thinking more seriously about retirement, savings, insurance, home repairs, and how much money I wanted tied up in everyday living expenses. But filling a pantry with discounted food is not the same as putting money into a savings account. Food can expire. Preferences can change. Freezer food can disappear under newer packages. And even shelf-stable groceries can become forgotten. Money sitting behind a cabinet door. I started thinking of every grocery item as cash that had changed form. If I bought $40 of food we did not need yet, that was $40 no longer available for gasoline, the electric bill, a prescription, a car repair, or simply staying in the bank, and that perspective made even small purchases look different. I was not trying to avoid sales. I was trying to use them on my terms. The reorder point told me whether I needed the item. My price book told me whether the price was actually good, and my stock-up limit told me how much was enough. Those 3 rules worked together: need first, price second, quantity third. And suddenly, the store could advertise almost anything it wanted without completely changing my plan. Once on Saturday, I saw ground beef marked down enough that I would normally have bought several packages, but I remembered that my freezer still had chicken, pork, and 2 portions of beef waiting to be used, so I bought none. 3 days later, I used what was already in the freezer for dinner, and realized something important. The cheapest grocery is often the one you already paid for. I began repeating another rule to myself. Whenever a promotion tempted me, a sale can change the price I am willing to pay, but it does not change how much my household can realistically use. And once I learned that, I stopped measuring a successful grocery trip by how many deals I brought home. I started measuring it by how little unnecessary food followed me through the front door. By the time I had been using my reorder points for a few weeks, I realized this little kitchen system mattered for another reason. Grocery shopping in America in 2026 is not happening in a world where every price moves together in some predictable way. One category can become noticeably more expensive while another gets cheaper, and that makes shopping from memory or fear even more dangerous. According to the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics data available in August, food-at-home prices were 7% higher in July than they had been a year earlier, but that average hides some much bigger differences. Fruits and vegetables were up 5.1%, non-alcoholic beverages were up 1%, and some individual products had moved far more dramatically. So when I hear someone say groceries are only up a few percent, I have to remind myself that my grocery cart does not contain an average. It contains specific things: coffee, meat, vegetables, bread, milk, eggs, rice, detergent, toilet paper, and whatever my family actually uses. And those prices can move in very different directions. USDA's latest 2026 outlook made that even clearer to me. It was forecasting food-at-home prices to rise about 2.7% for the year. But beef and veal were projected to rise more than 10%, fresh vegetables about 8%, while egg prices were actually projected to fall sharply after the extraordinary increases of previous years. That is exactly why I stopped making one emotional decision about food prices and started managing groceries item by item. If beef is expensive, that does not mean I need to panic buy pasta. If eggs are cheaper than they were last year, that does not mean I need 5 dozen eggs in the refrigerator. And if coffee is expensive, it may make sense to pay closer attention to my buy price, but it still does not mean I need to turn a closet into a coffee warehouse. The reorder point keeps me grounded in what my household actually uses, and there is another piece of the grocery bill that I rarely thought about when I was younger. Everything on that supermarket shelf had to get there somehow. Behind a gallon of milk, a bag of frozen vegetables, or a box of cereal is a network of farms, processors, warehouses, refrigeration trucks, highways, electricity, fuel, labor, packaging, and distribution centers. I may never see most of that infrastructure, but it is part of the system supporting the food I buy, and fuel has certainly not been trivial this year. On August 10, 2026, the U.S. average price for regular gasoline was about $4.01 a gallon, and on highway diesel was about $5.26 a gallon, with diesel especially relevant to so much of the trucking and distribution economy. That does not mean I can look at a carton of eggs and say exactly how many cents came from diesel, because grocery pricing is much more complicated than that, but it reminds me that the shelf price I see is connected to a much larger system I cannot control. Taxes are another reminder that there is no single American grocery experience. Where you live matters. Illinois eliminated its 1% state grocery sales tax beginning January 1, 2026, while allowing municipalities and counties to impose their own local grocery tax. And Arkansas still lists a reduced state sales tax rate on food and food ingredients. So two families buying similar groceries in two different places can face different tax treatment at checkout. And once I understood all of this, something became surprisingly freeing. I cannot control cattle supplies, crop conditions, fuel markets, tax laws, trucking costs, electricity prices, or what a grocery chain decides to put on sale next Thursday. But I can control whether something enters my cart. I can know what is already in my pantry. I can know how quickly we use it. I can know my reorder point. And I can refuse to let every scary headline or bright sale sign turn into another unnecessary purchase at 52 that started to feel like the kind of financial control I actually wanted. Not trying to predict every future price, not trying to beat the entire economy, just building a household system strong enough that changing prices no longer made every grocery trip feel like an emergency. Once the reorder points were working, I needed a routine simple enough that I would actually keep using it, because I knew myself well enough to understand that any system requiring 20 minutes of spreadsheets every night was eventually going to disappear, so I built the whole thing around one short check before my weekly grocery trip. Usually the evening before I planned to shop, I would walk through 4 places in the same order: the refrigerator, the freezer, the pantry, and then the cabinet where I kept household supplies. I was not trying to count every single item. I was only looking for the things that had crossed their reorder point. Milk was down to the last carton. It went on the list. There were 6 eggs left. Eggs went on the list. Coffee still had more than a week's supply. It stayed off. There were 2 unopened cans of tomatoes behind the one I was using. No need to buy more. The peanut butter backup jar was still sealed. Skip it. Frozen broccoli had dropped to 1 bag, and I already knew I wanted it for 2 dinners the following week. Add it. Laundry detergent was still comfortably above my reorder point. Leave it alone. And suddenly, my grocery list was being built by the kitchen itself, instead of by whatever I happened to remember while walking through the store. After that, I looked at the meals I was planning for the next 7 days and made small adjustments. If I had chicken in the freezer, I planned around chicken. If there were vegetables that needed to be used first, they became part of dinner before I bought replacements. If I had half a loaf of bread and tortillas, I did not automatically buy another loaf just because bread was something I usually purchased every week. Then, and only then, I checked the weekly ad. This order mattered more than I expected. Inventory first, reorder point second, meal plan third, price check fourth, because when I used to look at the weekly ad first, the sale page would create the shopping list for me. Suddenly, pork chops looked necessary because they were discounted. Cereal looked necessary because there was a digital coupon, and a family-size package of something I rarely used started looking like an opportunity. Now the ad had a different job. It helped me decide where and when to buy the things I had already determined we needed. One Saturday morning showed me just how different my shopping had become. Coffee had crossed its reorder point, so I checked the price and bought 1 package at a price I considered reasonable. Rice had not crossed its reorder point, so even though a large bag was advertised as a value deal, I left it. Frozen broccoli was low, so I bought 2 bags because I knew exactly how they would be used. Peanut butter was on promotion, but the backup jar at home meant I did not need it. Ground beef was marked down enough that the old me would have grabbed 3 packages, but I remembered that the freezer already held chicken thighs, pork chops, and 2 portions of beef, so I walked past it. There was something surprisingly satisfying about leaving a deal behind without feeling like I had lost, because I finally understood that the purpose of grocery shopping was not to collect bargains. It was to bring home what my household could actually use at the right time, and another benefit started showing up outside the grocery store. I was making fewer emergency trips. Before this system, running out of milk on Tuesday or coffee on Sunday could send me back into the car, and that extra trip did not just cost me whatever I bought, it cost time, gasoline, and another round of temptation inside the store. If I made 3 unnecessary trips in a month, I was not simply buying missing groceries. I was exposing myself 3 more times to bakery smells, checkout displays, seasonal promotions, end caps, and all those small items that somehow slipped into the cart because I was already there. The reorder point gave me enough warning to combine those purchases with the trip I was already planning, and little by little, my pantry started looking different. There were fewer duplicates, less food hidden behind other food, more empty space between items, And at first that empty space made me uncomfortable, because I had associated a packed pantry with security for so long. But then I realized something. A shelf that has breathing room is not a sign that a household is unprepared. Sometimes it is evidence that the household knows exactly what it needs. I could see what I owned. I could reach it. I could use older food before newer food, and I stopped discovering forgotten cans. Months after I bought them, my freezer changed too. Instead of becoming a frozen graveyard where good intentions disappeared beneath newer groceries, it became a working part of my meal plan. I knew roughly what was inside and how many meals it represented, and by the end of a few weeks, the kitchen felt calmer, not because I had filled every shelf, but because every item finally seemed to have a purpose. For the first time in years, I was not trying to keep my home prepared by owning more. I was keeping it prepared by knowing when enough was about to become not enough. After a few months of using reorder points, the biggest change was not that my pantry looked perfect, and it was not that I had suddenly discovered some secret way to make groceries cheap again. The biggest change was predictability. I stopped waking up on Sunday morning, wondering whether there was enough coffee. I stopped opening the refrigerator in the middle of dinner preparation and realizing we were out of eggs. I stopped buying a fourth jar of something because I could not remember whether we had one at home, and I stopped treating every grocery sale like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The kitchen simply became easier to manage. My grocery list got shorter because it was based on actual needs. My emergency trips became less frequent because I was replacing things before they disappeared completely. My freezer was easier to use because I was not constantly burying older food under new purchases, and perhaps most importantly, less of my money was sitting on shelves waiting to become dinner someday. That last part mattered more to me at 52 than it would have at 32, because by this point in life, I think differently about every dollar that leaves the checking account. I am thinking about retirement, home maintenance, insurance premiums, property taxes, medical expenses, car repairs, utilities, and all the things that do not care whether chicken happens to be on sale this week. So when I stopped overbuying groceries, I did not think of it as depriving myself. I thought of it as keeping more of my money available for the parts of life that actually needed it. One of the most surprising lessons was that security did not come from having 10 of everything. It came from knowing what I had and knowing when I would replace it. I used to feel safer when the pantry was packed from wall to wall, but a full shelf can create a false sense of preparedness if half of what is on it does not fit the way you actually eat. Now I would rather have 2 cans of something I know I will use than 12 cans I bought. Because they were cheap, I would rather have 1 backup jar of peanut butter than 5 jars slowly disappearing behind other groceries. I would rather have enough chicken for several planned meals than a freezer so full. I cannot remember what is underneath the top layer. This system also made me think about the way my grandmother ran her kitchen. She would never have used the phrase reorder point, and she certainly did not have an inventory app on her phone, but she always seemed to know when the flour was getting low, when another bag of sugar was needed, when the coffee tin was close to empty, when there were enough potatoes to get through the week, and when there was absolutely no reason to buy more canned food just because the store had put it on special. She was not managing inventory with technology. She was managing it with attention, and I think that is what I had lost. Somewhere between bigger supermarkets, warehouse clubs, digital coupons, online grocery orders, loyalty programs, bulk packages, and endless promotions, I had started believing that saving money meant constantly reacting to what stores were offering me. But now my kitchen decides what I buy, not the advertisement, not the end cap, not the fear that prices might rise next month, not the feeling that more must always be safer. Just a simple signal that says, you are getting close to the amount you actually need. Put this on the next list. And that small signal gave me something I did not expect: peace. I no longer felt like I was either running out or drowning in extras. I had found the middle ground, enough food to feel prepared, enough space to see what I owned, enough warning to avoid emergency shopping, and enough discipline to leave things in the store when I did not need them. And if there is one thing I would tell anyone trying this after 50, it is this. Do not start by creating a complicated system for every item in your house. Pick 10 groceries you use constantly. Decide how low you are willing to let each one get, write those numbers down, and try it for a month. You may discover that the problem was never that you needed a bigger pantry. You simply needed a better signal. And now I want to know about your kitchen. What is the one grocery item you constantly run out of? And what is the one thing you somehow keep buying, even though you already have plenty? Tell me both in the comments. Because I have a feeling we all have at least one of each. And if you are trying to build a calmer, smarter, more intentional life after 50, subscribe to the channel and join me here. Because we are going to keep taking ordinary household habits, the kinds of things our parents and grandparents often understood naturally, and turning them into simple systems that help us spend less, waste less, and feel a little more in control of our money and our lives.